The first time I saw my father's medals in another man's hand, I was sitting in a dentist's waiting room with a numb lip and a paper cup of water I couldn't drink properly. That is not how you expect a family war to begin. There was a little newsletter on the table beside me, one of those glossy county magazines with smiling realtors on the back and church fish fry dates near the middle. I picked it up because my appointment had been delayed 20 minutes, and because at 62 years old, I have become the kind of man who reads anything left on a table. Seed catalogs, oil change flyers, a pamphlet about gum disease. I will not be taking questions about that. Halfway through the magazine, I saw the photograph. My younger brother, Russell, stood in front of the Dubuque County Veterans Heritage Museum wearing his navy blazer, the one with brass buttons he polished more often than his shoes. His hand was resting on a velvet case. Inside that case were my father's medals. Not medals that looked like my father's medals. Not similar medals. My father's medals. I mean that literally. I knew the tiny dark mark on the edge of the Bronze Star ribbon where Dad had once spilled coffee in 1974, and my mother, God bless her, had tried to clean it with club soda and a toothbrush. I knew the replacement clasp on the Good Conduct Medal because I had ordered it myself from a military surplus shop in Rock Island in 2003. I knew the shadow line inside the purple velvet where the case had sat closed in my safe for 14 years. The caption read, "Local family donates World War II service medals in honor of late veteran Harold Mercer." Russell was smiling like a man who had just discovered lighting. I sat there with Novocaine in my cheek, the left side of my mouth hanging a little lower than the right, staring at my brother's picture while an aquarium bubbled beside the reception desk. A little orange fish kept bumping its nose against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Something in my stomach shifted. The dental assistant came out and called, "Mr. Mercer?" I looked up and said, "I need a minute." She nodded, probably thinking I was afraid of the drill. I wasn't. I have had 3 root canals, 1 kidney stone, and 1 teenage daughter learning to drive a 1,998 Ford Taurus in February ice. Dental equipment does not scare me. A brother with his hand on your dead father's medals, though. That will make you sit in your car for a while. My name is Calvin Mercer. I'm 62 years old. I spent 38 years as a machinist at a tool and die shop off Kerper Boulevard in Dubuque, Iowa, and I retired with 1 bad shoulder, 2 good hands, and a habit of measuring everything twice, even things that do not need measuring. Envelopes on a kitchen table. The distance between salt and pepper shakers. How far a man's story sits from the truth. I live in a small brick house in the North End, not far from where the hills make winter feel personal. My wife, Elaine, passed 8 years ago from ovarian cancer, and our daughter, Molly, lives across the river in East Dubuque with her husband and 2 boys who believe pancakes are a food group. Most mornings, I make coffee in the same dented percolator Elaine hated, feed the neighbor's orange cat even though he is not mine, and carry my father's 1,969 brushed chrome Zippo in my left jacket pocket. The Zippo has a small dent in the upper left corner from the day it slipped out of Dad's shirt pocket and hit our kitchen floor when I was 10. He blamed gravity. My mother blamed him. Both were right. That lighter is one of the few things of his I use. The medals, I never used. You don't use something like that. You keep it. You protect it. You open the case once in a while when the house is quiet and let the past breathe without asking it to perform. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. My father, Harold Mercer, was not a loud veteran. Some men come home and build their whole personality around the war. Dad came home and built cabinets. He worked at Brunswick for 29 years, fixed bicycles for every kid on our block, and never once corrected people who called him Harry even though he hated it. He could sit through a whole Thanksgiving dinner without mentioning Europe, then spend 40 minutes explaining how to sharpen a hand plane blade like civilization depended on it. When I was a boy, I thought that meant the war had not marked him much. Children are foolish in very specific ways. Dad kept his medals in a cedar cigar box at the back of the bedroom closet, wrapped in one of my mother's old scarves. Not hidden exactly, just placed where nobody casual would find them. Once, when I was 12, I pulled the box down while looking for Christmas presents and found the medals shining in the scarf like trapped weather. He caught me with them open on the bed. I expected anger. Dad did not do anger the way other men did. He did silence, and silence from him could clear a room quicker than shouting. He sat beside me, took the bronze star between 2 fingers and said, "That one came with a story I don't like telling." I asked, "Did you do something brave?" He looked at me for a long second. Mostly I was scared and did not have time to stop being scared. Here's the thing about my father. He never confused fear with failure. He never confused medals with character either. He used to say shiny things attract the wrong hands. I thought that was just one of his sayings, like never buy a ladder from a man with clean shoes, or fine is a word that sounds like a compliment but isn't. I didn't know it yet, but he had been warning me about Russell since before either of us had the nerve to admit Russell needed warning about. Russell was 4 years younger than me and born with the kind of face strangers trusted too quickly. Blonde hair, straight teeth, blue eyes that always looked moist with sincerity. He sold insurance for a while, then boats, then commercial roofing, then investment products. Nobody in our family understood, but he described with the confidence of a preacher holding a microphone. Russell could enter a room late and make everyone feel lucky he had arrived. I could fix a milling machine by sound. Guess which one people called charming. When we were kids, Russell liked to borrow things before asking. My baseball glove, Dad's drafting pencil, Mom's change jar. He never stole, according to him. He relocated. He leveraged. He temporarily held. Even at 14, he had vocabulary that wore a necktie. One summer, he took Dad's Zippo to impress a girl at the county fair. He was 15. He did not smoke. The girl did not care. Dad noticed before dinner because the lighter had weight in his pocket, and absence has weight too, if you love a thing long enough. Dad found Russell behind the garage, flicking that Zippo open and shut like he was in a movie. Click, flame, click, flame. Beautiful the way certain small betrayals are beautiful. Before you understand the bill. Dad held out one hand. Just one. Russell laughed and said, "I was going to put it back." Dad said his name once, quietly. "Russell." That was enough. Russell handed it over. Later that night, I heard Dad in the kitchen telling Mom, "That boy loves the shine more than the story." I was standing in the hallway in my socks, holding a glass of water I no longer wanted. That sentence stayed with me. It settled somewhere behind my ribs and waited decades to become useful. When Dad died in 2009, the medals came to me in a way that made Russell angry without giving him anything clean to argue with. Dad had a will, and the will was simple. The house went to Mom while she was alive. His tools came to me. His watch went to Russell. The medals, service records, letters, and Zippo went into what he called Calvin's keeping. Not ownership, keeping. That mattered to Dad. Russell stood in the lawyer's office with his arms crossed and his jaw doing that slow, grinding thing he did whenever a room did not bend toward him. The lawyer, Mr. Hanrahan, was 80 if he was a day and had eyebrows like winter weeds. He read the line twice because Russell asked him to. "Calvin's keeping," Russell said. "What does that even mean?" Mr. Hanrahan looked over his glasses. "It means your father trusted Calvin to keep them." Russell gave a little laugh. Not a real laugh. More like a receipt printing. "So I don't even get one?" Mom, who was small and tired and wearing the black dress she saved for funerals and bank appointments, said, "Your father gave you his watch." Russell looked at the watch box in his lap like she had handed him a napkin. "I should tell you something about that watch. It was a Hamilton field watch Dad bought after the war with money from 3 weeks of cabinet work. He wore it every day for 40 years. The leather band had darkened where his wrist met heat and labor. It was not nothing. But Russell wanted the medals because people look at medals. They ask about medals. They make room in their faces for medals. A watch just tells time. For years after that, I kept Dad's things in a fire safe bolted to the floor of my basement office. The safe was a gray Sentry safe, Model S6770, bought from a hardware store on Dodge Street for $319 plus tax. Eddie Rourke helped me install it on a Saturday morning in April. Eddie had been my best friend since 1978, when he accidentally locked himself inside his own service van outside Creslane's bowling alley, and I spent 20 minutes laughing before I let him out. He became a locksmith anyway, which tells you everything you need to know about Eddie's relationship with shame. When we bolted the safe down, Eddie leaned back on his heels and said, "Cal, this thing is not Fort Knox, but it'll stop lazy family." I said, "That's mostly the category I'm worried about." He grinned. "Put that on a bumper sticker." Eddie knew what was inside. Not every detail, but enough. He had seen me open the cigar box once after Dad's funeral, when the grief was still fresh and mean and sitting in every corner of the house like an unpaid bill. Eddie didn't say much. He just stood beside me while I checked each ribbon, each paper, each folded letter. That is what good friends do sometimes. They stand near the thing you cannot carry and do not offer dumb advice. The only people who knew the safe combination were me and Elaine. After Elaine died, only me. At least that is what I believed, until the dentist's waiting room. That afternoon, after my appointment, I drove home slowly through a light rain that turned the bluff roads silver. My mouth was still numb, and every time I swallowed, it felt like half my face had been borrowed by someone else. I parked in my driveway at 3:17 p.m. I remember the time because the dashboard clock in my 2011 Buick Lucerne runs 6 minutes fast, and I have never bothered to fix it. Some inaccuracies become dependable. I went inside, hung my jacket on the back of a kitchen chair, then took it down again because the Zippo was still in the pocket. Old habit. I set the lighter on the table, next to the county magazine I had taken from the dentist's office without asking. I will return it eventually, probably. Then I went downstairs. My basement office smelled like machine oil, old paper, and the lemon cleaner Molly bought me because she said my house smelled too widower. There was a workbench against one wall, a metal filing cabinet, a framed photograph of Dad holding Molly when she was a baby, and the safe tucked beneath a shelf of coffee cans filled with screws sorted by size. I sort screws when I'm nervous. I know how that sounds. I am at peace with it. The safe door was closed. That was my first foolish little hope. I knelt, turned the dial, opened it, and saw the empty space where the cedar cigar box should have been. Not messy, not ransacked, not dramatic, just empty. Some thefts are loud. This one was tidy. I stayed on one knee longer than I needed to. My right hand rested on the safe door. My left hand touched the floor for balance. The concrete was cold through my palm. I did not yell. I did not call Russell. I did not throw anything, though there was a coffee can of 1/4-inch washers nearby that would have made a satisfying sound against the wall. I went very, very quiet, because there, on the bottom shelf of the safe, beneath the missing space, was the old manila envelope my father had sealed in 2004 and told me not to open unless someone tried to make his service about themselves. For 15 years I had thought that envelope was just Dad being Dad. Careful, private. A little dramatic in the understated Mercer way. I picked it up, and my hands were steady until I saw his handwriting. "Calvin, if the medals leave your keeping without your say, start here. And trust me, when your dead father gives you instructions from inside a safe, you read slowly." Inside the envelope were 4 things: a photocopy of my father's discharge papers, a handwritten inventory of every medal, ribbon, letter, and photograph in that cedar box, a yellowed receipt from a framing shop on Central Avenue dated the 12th of March, 1986, and 1 letter in Dad's handwriting, 3 pages long, folded with the kind of precision that makes you feel guilty opening it. I sat at my workbench and laid everything out in a straight line. I told you, I measure things when I'm trying not to feel them. The letter began without sentiment. "Calvin, if you're reading this, somebody has decided the shine matters more than the story." That was Dad. No throat clearing, no big speech, just a sentence that walked in, took off its coat, and told the truth. He wrote that the medals were not to be sold, donated, displayed, loaned, photographed for publicity, or used in any family disagreement without my approval. He wrote that I was the keeper because I had asked him questions about men, not decorations. He wrote that Russell had asked him twice, once in 1991 and once in 2002, whether the medals might be worth anything someday. Worth anything. Think about that for a second. My father had friends whose names he would not say after dark, and Russell wanted to know whether the ribbon bars had resale value. I read the sentence twice, then took off my glasses and wiped them with the blue flannel cloth Elaine used to tease me about. The lenses were not dirty. I wiped them anyway. Dad's letter also mentioned a woman named Marianne Voss. "If there is ever confusion," he wrote, "call Marianne at the County Museum. She recorded my history in 1998. She knows what belongs with what. More importantly, she knows what kind of man asks to be photographed with another man's pain." I had not thought about Marianne in years. Back in 1998, when Dad was 74 and still pretending his knees were just making comments, a young museum researcher came to our house with a tape recorder the size of a brick and a box of blank cassettes. Marianne Voss was maybe 26 then, hair pinned up crooked, a yellow legal pad balanced on her knee, asking questions with the careful softness of someone walking through a room where glass had broken. Dad liked her. That surprised me. Dad did not like being interviewed. He thought most questions were either too nosy or too stupid, and he treated both categories the same way, by blinking slowly until the person felt ashamed. But Marianne asked him where he was when he first heard Glenn Miller on a military radio. She asked what the mud smelled like. She asked what he missed most that nobody ever thought to ask about. Dad told her, "Clean socks." She wrote it down. Then she laughed, and Dad laughed too, which in our house counted as a weather event. That interview became part of a county veterans archive, tucked away somewhere in the museum behind climate-controlled doors and donor plaques. I remembered Dad signing a release form at our kitchen table with a blue Bic pen that skipped on the second page. I remembered Russell stopping by halfway through, seeing the medals out, and suddenly becoming very interested in family history. He stood behind Marianne's chair and said, "Dad never talks like this with us." Dad looked at him and said, "You never ask like this." Nobody said anything for a while. That was the first red flag, though I did not know enough to name it. Russell had always wanted the scene without doing the sitting, the respect without the responsibility. He wanted to stand beside the old photographs and let people assume he had carried the hard parts. And here's the thing. Russell was not a cartoon villain. That would have been easier. He could be generous in public. He remembered birthdays. He tipped 20% when people were watching and sometimes when they weren't. He helped Mom clean gutters after Dad's hip surgery and brought her butterscotch candies from the grocery store because she liked them in the car. People like Russell are hard because they do enough good to make you question the bad. My daughter Molly used to call him Uncle Showtime when she was little. Not to his face. She learned early that Russell liked children best when they clapped. He would arrive at Christmas with gifts wrapped in metallic paper, the kind that looked expensive and tore too cleanly, then tell a story about how difficult they were to find. He once gave Molly a wooden rocking horse and spent 20 minutes explaining the artisan who made it. I checked the underside later. There was a Target sticker half scraped off. I almost admired the effort. Almost. After Dad died, Russell's interest in the medals came in waves. He asked to borrow them for Veterans Day at his Rotary Club in 2011. I said no, but offered to bring them myself and stay with the display. He said that would send the wrong message. What message? I asked. That you don't trust me. I looked at him across my kitchen table. It was 7:42 p.m. Elaine had just put meatloaf in the oven, and rain was tapping against the window like someone trying to get our attention. I don't, I said. Elaine made a small sound from the stove. Not shock, more like agreement escaping before manners could stop it. Russell laughed, but his jaw did the grinding thing. You've always been dramatic. No, I said. I've always been accurate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. 2 years later, He asked if he could photograph the medals for family documentation. I told him I already had photographs, front and back, printed and digital, stored with insurance records. That annoyed him more than the refusal. Clever men dislike finding out the quiet man made copies. In 2016, after Mom passed, Russell asked whether Dad had ever reconsidered the keeping arrangement. He used that word, reconsidered, as if our father had been a committee with minutes and revised motions. I told him no. He said, "You know, Cal, someday those should be somewhere people can see them." I said, "Someday, maybe." He leaned forward. "You can't just hide them in a basement forever." I remember the way he looked around my kitchen when he said basement. Like my house was a storage error. Like my grief had bad lighting. The truth was, I had thought about loaning the medals to the museum. More than once. I had even called once in 2019, before the pandemic turned everything strange. A receptionist told me Marianne Voss was now the museum director and would call me back, but then Molly's youngest broke his arm jumping off a porch railing, and life folded over the idea. I put the paper with Marianne's number in a drawer under takeout menus. That is how some important things get delayed. Not by tragedy, by Tuesday. After finding the empty safe, I did not call Marianne first. I called Eddie. He answered on the fourth ring with, "If this is about your back door sticking, I told you to sand the edge in October." "Eddie," I said, "the medals are gone." There was a silence on his end. And for once, Eddie Rourke did not make a joke. "You sure?" "I'm looking at the hole they left." "Russell?" "I saw them in a museum newsletter." His hand was on the case. Eddie exhaled through his nose. I could picture him in his recliner, work boots still on, TV muted, one of those magnifying visors pushed up on his forehead like a confused doctor. "Don't go over there," he said. I wasn't going to. "Yes, you were." I was considering it. That's what men our age call going. I sat back and looked at Dad's letter on the bench. The paper had softened at the folds, and his handwriting slanted harder near the end, like his hand had tired but his meaning had not. Eddie said, "Did the safe show damage?" "No." "Combination?" "No signs." "Who had access to your office?" That question had a simple answer until it didn't. Russell had been in my house 6 weeks earlier for Molly's birthday dinner. February 3. A Saturday. We had pot roast, green beans, and a chocolate cake with too many candles because my grandsons believe birthdays are a fire safety challenge. Russell had come downstairs with me after dinner to look at a stuck hinge on an old machinist's chest he wanted me to fix. He stood near the safe for maybe 3 minutes while I found a screwdriver. 3 minutes is nothing unless a man has been waiting years for them, I told Eddie. He swore once, softly. That was Eddie being formal. "Did he see you open it?" "No." "Did he have time to put something near it?" I looked at the shelf above the safe. Coffee cans, screws, a flashlight. A digital humidity meter Molly bought me for cigar storage even though I do not smoke cigars. I leaned closer. On the back corner of the shelf, behind a Folgers can filled with brass washers, sat a little black square, no bigger than a postage stamp. I stared at it. "Cal?" Eddie said. I picked it up between 2 fingers. It was a camera. One of those tiny wireless things people buy online and pretend they need for home security. Smooth black plastic. A pinhole lens. A dead adhesive strip on the back. Something cold moved from my neck to my hands. "He watched me," I said. Eddie's voice changed. "Do not touch anything else. I already touched this." "Well, put it in a bag, genius." I almost laughed. Almost. Which, if you know me, is the closest thing to tap dancing. I found a sandwich bag in the kitchen, dropped the camera into it, and set it beside Dad's letter. The camera looked ridiculous there, cheap and modern next to paper that had waited faithfully for 22 years. That night, I did not sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table with the Zippo in front of me, opening and closing it without lighting it. Click, click, click. The house made its small night noises. Refrigerator hum. Floor settling. Wind pushing against the west window. At 11:38 p.m., I searched the museum website. There it was. Upcoming event. Mercer Family Medal Donation Ceremony. Saturday, March 23, 2 p.m. Honoring the service of Harold Harry Mercer, presented by his son, Russell Mercer. Harry. Dad hated Harry. I stared at that name until the letters stopped looking like letters. The event description said Russell would share personal memories of his father's wartime courage and formally donate the medals on behalf of the Mercer family. There was a small RSVP button, a photograph from the newsletter, and a quote from Russell. My father taught us that legacy belongs to those brave enough to carry it forward. You know what I did? I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes the body reaches for the wrong tool when the right one would break something. The next morning, at exactly 8:31, I called the museum. A young man answered with the bright voice of someone who had never been trapped in family history before breakfast. Dubuque County Veterans Heritage Museum. This is Nathan. I need to speak with Marianne Voss. May I ask what this is regarding? Yes, I said. Harold Mercer's medals. The line went quiet for half a breath. Then Nathan said, much more carefully, "One moment, please." Marianne came on less than a minute later. Mr. Mercer? Not Calvin. Not sir. Mr. Mercer. Like she already knew which Mercer should have called first. Her voice was lower than I remembered, sharpened by years of meetings and people trying to donate moth-eaten uniforms with no provenance. This is Calvin, I said. She let out a slow breath. I was hoping you'd call. That was when the story changed shape. Marianne Voss did not waste my time with museum politeness. She said, Mr. Mercer, before I say anything else, I need to know one thing. Did you authorize your brother to donate those medals? No. There was a sound on her end, paper sliding across a desk. I didn't think so. That sentence did more to settle me than any sympathy would have. Sympathy is fine at funerals and hospital beds. In a mess like this, you want competence. Marianne sounded like a woman who had already sharpened the pencil. She asked if I could come to the museum that morning and bring anything connecting me to the collection. I told her I had my father's letter, copies of his service records, the original inventory, and photographs of the medals in my safe from 2014, 2017, and 2021. She paused. You have dated photographs? I'm a machinist, I said. We document what matters. For the first time, she almost laughed. I'll make coffee. The museum sat in an old brick building near Washington Street, the kind with tall windows and floors that remembered factory boots. I got there at 10:12 a.m. A school bus was parked outside, and a line of fifth graders in winter coats was filing in behind a teacher carrying a clipboard like a shield. The place smelled like floor wax, old wool, and coffee left too long on a burner. Marianne met me in the lobby. She was in her mid-50s now, silver threaded through dark hair cut just below her jaw, square glasses, black cardigan, no jewelry except a small enamel pin shaped like Iowa. She had the direct gaze of someone who had spent 30 years asking families uncomfortable questions about dead men. Calvin, she said, offering her hand. Marianne. Her grip was firm, not performative, just there. She looked at the manila envelope under my arm and then at my face. I'm sorry. I know. 2 words. That was all we needed. She took me to her office behind the exhibit hall. It was narrow and crowded, with archival boxes stacked against one wall, a framed photo of a B-17 crew above a file cabinet, and a mug that said, History does not care about your feelings. I liked her immediately for owning that mug. On her desk was a folder marked Mercer, Harold. Seeing my father's name typed on a museum tab did something strange to me. It made him both smaller and larger. A man reduced to paper. A life heavy enough to need a folder. Marianne opened it. Your brother contacted us in January, she said. He said he had inherited the medals after your mother passed, and that the family had agreed they belonged in public view. Mom died in 2016. I know. How? She slid a photocopy toward me. Because I checked. It was Russell's donation intake form. His handwriting was neat, slanted, confident. Under relationship to veteran, he had written son and family representative. Under ownership history. He had written held by family since 1946, transferred to Russell Mercer by family agreement after mother's passing. Family agreement. There it was. 2 little words wearing a stolen suit. He gave you paperwork? I asked. He gave us a letter. Marianne pulled out a single sheet, and I felt my shoulders tighten before I even read it. It was supposedly from me. To whom it may concern, it began. I, Calvin Mercer, confirm that my brother Russell Mercer is authorized to donate our father's military medals on behalf of the Mercer family. The signature at the bottom was close enough to insult me. Not good enough to fool anyone who had seen me sign a check. The C in Calvin was too round. The M in Mercer leaned the wrong way, and whoever wrote it used my full middle name, Calvin Thomas Mercer, which I only use on tax forms and when the dentist wants to charge me for something. My father used to say forgeries often fail because liars imagine people are tidier than they are. He was right about that too. That's not mine, I said. I assumed not. You still accepted the medals? Marianne folded her hands on the desk. We accepted them for review. Not accession. There's a difference. Your brother heard the first word and built a ceremony around it. Of course he did. Russell had always been able to hear applause through walls that had not been built yet. He pushed for the event? I asked. He insisted it would mean a lot to the family. I looked down at the fake letter again. My hand was still on the edge of the desk, but my fingers had curled under it. Marianne noticed. She didn't tell me to calm down, which was wise, because calm is not something you hand to another person like a napkin. She said, Mr. Mercer, I need to ask whether you want law enforcement involved now. Now. That word sat between us like a loaded drawer. I thought about calling the police. I thought about Russell in his blazer explaining himself under fluorescent lights. I thought about the little black camera in the sandwich bag on my kitchen table. I thought about my father's letter and the line about men who ask to be photographed with another man's pain. Then I thought about the event page. Russell wanted a stage. That was the part I could not ignore. Not because I wanted revenge. Revenge is loud. Revenge makes people stupid. What I wanted was correction. A clean one. A public one. The kind that leaves the truth standing upright after everyone else runs out of breath. Not yet, I said. Marianne studied me. What are you thinking? I'm thinking my brother has invited people to hear him lie. Yes. So let them hear the truth from someone who isn't me. Her eyes moved to Dad's folder. The silence sat like a fifth guest. Then she leaned back slowly. You want the ceremony to happen. I want the room to be exactly the room he asked for. Marianne did not smile, but something in her face approved. There are legal limits to what I can say publicly. I understand. I can correct the record. I can state provenance. I can decline the donation. I can identify you as the documented keeper if your papers support that. They will. I cannot accuse him of theft from the podium. I don't need you to. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She nodded once. Bring me copies of everything. Not originals. Copies. I'll have our collections committee chair review them today. And Calvin? Yes? Do not warn your brother. That was Marianne Voss. Professional. Direct. A little terrifying in the way librarians can be terrifying when they know where every record is buried. By noon, I was back home making copies on a Canon printer that jams if you look at it with doubt. I copied Dad's letter, the inventory, the service records, the framing receipt, my insurance photographs, and 3 old pictures of Dad sitting at our kitchen table with the medals in front of him during Marianne's 1998 interview. In one photo, Russell stood in the background near the refrigerator, arms crossed, already studying the shine. Eddie came over at 1:40 with a tool bag, a magnifier, and 2 ham sandwiches wrapped in wax paper because he said betrayal goes down better with mustard. He examined the little camera without touching it directly. Cheap model, he said. Motion activated. Probably records to a phone app. Battery would last a few days. He put it there during Molly's birthday. Looks that way. He watched me open the safe. Looks that way. Then came back later. Eddie looked at the safe dial, the shelf, the basement window, the office door. Any sign he forced entry? No. Key? I owned 3 house keys. Mine, Molly's emergency key, and the one hidden in the ceramic frog on the back porch, which Elaine bought at a garden sale in 2006, and which I kept, even though it looked like it knew state secrets. I checked the frog. The key was there, but it had been copied. I knew because the little brass edge had fresh burr marks where old wear should have been smooth. I held it up. Eddie squinted. Well, I'll be damned. That's one. One what? One more thing he thought I wouldn't notice. Eddie gave me a look. Cal, most people wouldn't notice. I'm not most people. No, he said. You're the only man I know who can detect crime through key texture. I almost smiled. Almost. At 4:26 p.m., Russell called. His name lit up on my phone while Eddie and I were still in the kitchen with copies spread across the table. I let it ring twice, 3 times. On the 4th, Eddie mouthed, "Don't answer." I answered. "Calvin," Russell said, bright and warm, like a man stepping onto a porch with flowers in one hand and matches in the other. "You busy Saturday?" "I'm retired." "People assume that means no." He laughed. "Same old Cal. Listen, there's a little thing at the museum. Dad's medals. I'm sure you saw something about it." I did. A pause. Not long, but there. The first hairline crack. "Well, good. I was hoping you'd come. It's important for the family to show unity." Unity. That word made Eddie close his eyes. Russell continued. "I know you've been protective of those items, and I respect that. I really do. But some things are bigger than one person's basement." There it was again. Basement. I looked at Dad's Zippo on the table. The dent caught a little square of afternoon light. "Russell," I said. "Are you asking me to attend?" "I am. As family?" "Of course. And you'll be speaking?" "Well, yes. Just a few words. Dad deserves that." I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the Zippo. "He does," I said. Russell softened his voice. He was good at that. He could make concern sound like a cardigan. "I know this might be emotional for you, but I think once you see those medals displayed properly, you'll understand." Displayed properly. In a glass case under his name, beneath a caption that called, "Dad Harry." "Maybe I will," I said. Eddie stared at me like I had started juggling knives. Russell exhaled, relieved. He thought he had won something. Men like Russell often mistake quiet for surrender. It is one of their most expensive habits. "Good," he said. "Saturday at 2. Wear something nice. I'll bring Dad's Zippo." Another pause. "Sure," he said. "That would be meaningful." After we hung up, Eddie said, "Wear something nice?" I heard. "You're going?" "Yes." "With the documents?" "No." "That," Eddie frowned. "With Marianne," I said. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. Saturday came cold and bright, with the kind of March wind that makes flags snap like they are trying to warn you. I arrived at the museum at 1:47 p.m., wearing my gray suit, my father's Zippo in my pocket, and no expression Russell could use. The room was already half full. Veterans in caps, local paper, 2 city council members, my daughter Molly near the back, holding her purse with both hands, Eddie beside her, jaw set, and at the front, standing next to a covered display case, was Russell in his navy blazer, smiling at everyone like he had personally invented honor. Then Marianne walked to the podium, carrying a blue folder, not the museum folder, my father's folder. And Russell's smile changed shape. Russell saw that folder before he saw me. That told me something. A guilty man watches paper the way a farmer watches weather. I stood at the back for a moment, letting the room settle around me. The museum had arranged folding chairs in 4 neat rows. The display case sat under a gray cloth at the front, lit by 2 small lamps that made the covered shape look ceremonial, almost holy. On the wall behind it hung a black and white photograph of young soldiers standing beside a truck somewhere in France, their faces too clean for what was coming. My father was not in that photograph, but I looked at it anyway. Sometimes your dead find you through strangers. Molly saw me first. Her eyes moved from my face to my pocket, where the Zippo made its small rectangle against my suit coat. She started to stand. I held up one hand. Just one. She sat back down. Eddie leaned toward her and whispered something. I could tell by her expression it was probably not comforting, but it made her breathe again. Russell stepped away from the display case and came toward me with both arms slightly open, as if we were about to be photographed for a church directory. "Cal," he said, "you made it." I said I would. His smile tightened at the edges. Up close, I could see he had shaved carefully. Too carefully. There was a little patch of irritation under his jaw, red as a warning light. He looked me over. "You look good." "Thank you. You okay?" I looked past him at the covered case. "Are you?" His eyes flicked once toward Marianne, then back to me. Of course. There it was. The performance holding. Not strong, but holding. Marianne stepped to the podium and tapped the microphone. It gave a soft thump that made 3 veterans in the front row look up at the same time. "Good afternoon," she said. "Thank you all for joining us today." Her voice filled the room cleanly. No drama, no tremble. Just authority with its shoes polished. Russell moved back to the front and stood beside her, hands folded, chin slightly raised. He had placed himself half a step closer to the display than Marianne, which was a small thing and also the whole man. Marianne thanked the museum board, the volunteers, the local veterans, and the families who trusted the museum with objects that carry more than material value. Russell nodded through all of it like a man accepting a compliment addressed to weather. Then she said, "Today's program concerns the service items of Staff Sergeant Harold Mercer. Not Harry. Harold." Russell's jaw moved. I put my right hand in my pocket and touched the Zippo. The dent was under my thumb. Marianne continued, "Before we proceed, I want to clarify the museum's role in receiving military artifacts. We do not simply take possession of a family object because someone brings it through the door. We review provenance, ownership history, documentation, and the wishes of the veteran when those wishes are available." The room stayed polite. People shifted in their chairs. A woman from the newspaper lifted her pen. Russell leaned toward the microphone, smiling. "And we're very grateful for that care." Marianne did not look at him. "That care," she said, "is especially important when the object has been presented by one family member on behalf of others." His smile froze. "I mean that literally." His mouth stayed in position, but the rest of his face stopped helping. Marianne opened the blue folder. "Paper has a sound when it knows it is about to ruin someone," she said. "The museum received these medals from Mr. Russell Mercer in January for review as a proposed donation. At that time, Mr. Mercer represented himself as the family authority over the collection." Russell gave a small chuckle and turned toward the room. "As my brother knows, I've always cared deeply about Dad's legacy." He looked at me when he said brother. Several people turned. I did not move. Marianne said, "Mr." Russell Mercer also provided a written authorization, purportedly signed by his brother, Mr. Calvin Mercer. That did it. Molly's hand went to her mouth. Eddie leaned back slowly. One of the older veterans in the front row lowered his chin, the way men do when a room suddenly becomes a courtroom without asking permission. Russell raised his hand slightly. "Marianne, I don't think we need to get into internal family paperwork in front of Mr. Mercer," she said. Not loudly. "Please let me finish. Quiet power is a strange thing. You can feel it when someone has the floor and no need to prove it." Russell's hand dropped. Marianne looked at the audience. After routine review, the museum found inconsistencies in the authorization and in the ownership statement attached to the proposed donation. We then contacted, and were contacted by, Mr. Calvin Mercer. She turned a page. I watched Russell swallow. Mr. Calvin Mercer provided documentation from Staff Sergeant Harold Mercer himself, including an inventory dated 2004 service records, photographs of the collection over multiple years, and a handwritten directive. The newspaper woman was writing fast now. Russell stepped closer to the podium. That directive, whatever it says, was private. Dad was old when he wrote a lot of things. That was the wrong sentence. You could feel it land badly. Not loudly. Badly. Like a plate, set too close to the edge of a table. Marianne looked at him then. Fully. Your father was 80, Mr. Mercer. The letter is coherent, dated, witnessed, and consistent with records we already held from his 1998 oral history interview. Russell blinked. He had not known about the museum's copy. That was the twist I had not told Eddie, the one Marianne had found when she pulled Dad's archive. During that 1998 interview, Dad had added a sealed supplemental note to his file, not to be opened unless the collection was ever offered to the museum. Marianne had forgotten the exact contents until the archivist found it in a restricted sleeve 2 days earlier. My father had been ahead of us by 28 years. Marianne lifted a smaller cream envelope from the folder. This supplemental note, she said, was deposited by Harold Mercer in 1998. It names Calvin Mercer as the sole keeper authorized to decide whether the medals should be loaned, displayed, or donated. Russell whispered, "No." It was the first honest thing he had said all day. Marianne read only one line aloud. "If Russell brings them to you without Calvin standing beside him, ask where he got the key." The room changed. Not exploded. Changed. There are silences that are empty, and there are silences packed so tight they seem to push against the windows. This was the second kind. Russell looked at me then. Really looked. And for a moment I saw the boy behind the garage with Dad's Zippo in his hand. 15 years old. Pretty smile. Borrowed flame. "Cal," he said. I walked down the aisle. Slowly. Not because I wanted drama. Because my right knee clicks if I rush on hard floors, and I refused to give Russell even that small piece of comedy. When I reached the front, Marianne stepped aside just enough. She did not hand me the microphone. She understood I had not come to make a speech. Russell said, low, "You set me up." I looked at him. "No, you scheduled it." His face twitched. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" "After." "After what?" He looked toward the covered case, toward the room, toward anywhere that did not answer. I said his name once, quietly. "Russell." His eyes came back. "The medals were in my safe." He licked his lips. "They belonged to the family. So did the key." That hit him harder than I expected. His hand went still at his side. Molly made a small sound behind me, and I hated that she had to hear any of this. But hiding rot does not protect children. It only teaches them to decorate around it. Marianne spoke again, calm as a locked door. "The museum will not accept this donation. The items will be returned to Mr. Calvin Mercer today. If Mr. Mercer chooses to pursue a formal loan in the future, the museum will handle that separately and under his authorization." Russell turned to her. "You're humiliating me." Marianne's face did not change. "No, Mr. Mercer, I am correcting the record." Beautiful sentence. Clean as a blade, but safe to hold. The city councilman in the second row looked down at his shoes. The veterans did not. They kept watching Russell with the particular disappointment of men who know the difference between honor and decoration. Then Russell did what men like him do when truth gets too near. He reached for feeling. "Dad would have wanted people to see them," he said. His voice cracked just enough to be useful. He wouldn't want them locked in Calvin's basement like junk. There was that word again. Basement. Something in my chest did a thing it had done only twice before. Once when Elaine got her diagnosis, and once when my grandson asked why Grandma's chair was still empty. Not anger exactly. A deep internal closing. I took the Zippo from my pocket and held it up. "This was Dad's too," I said. Russell stared at it. "You took it once," I continued. "County Fair. 1,979. You said you were going to put it back." His eyes narrowed. What does that have to do with anything? Dad said you loved the shine more than the story. The room was so still I could hear the old building's radiator click. I lowered the lighter. He was right then. He's right now. Russell's face went red, then pale, which was almost impressive, like watching weather cross a field. You always thought you were better than me, he said. No. Yes, you did. No, I said again. I thought you would eventually stop. That one landed differently. Not as punishment, as grief. For half a second, Russell looked old. Older than me somehow. All the polish drained out, and what remained was a man standing beside stolen honor with nowhere graceful to put his hands. Marianne nodded to Nathan, the young staffer, who removed the gray cloth from the case. My father's medals shone under the lamps, the coffee stain, the replacement clasp, the shadowed velvet, all of it. But beside the case, where Russell had expected a donor card with his name, stood a temporary label Marianne had placed that morning. On loan for verification. Collection of Harold Mercer. Keeper of record. Calvin Mercer. Not owner. Keeper. My throat tightened at that word. Dad's word. Still standing. Russell read it, and that was when his shoulders dropped. Not collapse like in movies. No shouting. No storming out. Just a small surrender of posture, as if an invisible string had been cut between his neck and his pride. He whispered, "You had no right." I leaned close enough that only he and Marianne could hear. "I had every chance to destroy you," I said. "Police first. Lawyer first. Newspaper first. I chose the record first." He stared at me. "That is the mercy," I said. "Don't mistake it for weakness." Then I stepped back. The room waited for something bigger. People always do. They expect a slap, a curse, a final line sharp enough to hang a trailer on. Real life is less generous and much heavier. Marianne returned to the microphone. "In light of today's clarification," she said, "we will not proceed with the donation ceremony. However, with Mr. Calvin Mercer's permission, we will keep the display open this afternoon as an educational viewing while the family determines next steps." She looked at me. I nodded once. Russell turned sharply. "Calvin." I did not answer. Not because I couldn't, because I was done lending him the dignity of argument. Molly came to me then, her face pale, her hand still frozen around her purse strap. "Dad," she whispered. "Did Uncle Russell really—" "I know," I said. I know, Dad, but did he?" I looked at my brother, who was now standing alone beside the thing he had tried to claim. "Yes," I said. "He did." And that was the second time that day the truth sounded smaller than the damage. The afternoon did not end with applause. That matters. People sometimes imagine truth arrives like a marching band, loud and righteous, with everyone facing the right direction by the final note. It does not. Truth walks in carrying a cardboard box, asks for a signature, and leaves the room smelling faintly of coffee and embarrassment. Marianne closed the formal program with more grace than the room deserved. She invited anyone who wished to view the medals to do so quietly, and reminded them that service artifacts should be treated as evidence of a life, not decorations for a family argument. I watched Russell flinch at that. Good. Not because I enjoyed it, because a man should feel the shape of what he has done at least once without a lawyer translating it for him. People came up slowly, the older veterans first. They stood with their hands clasped behind their backs, reading Dad's name on the temporary label. One man in a Korean War cap bent close to look at the Bronze Star ribbon and said, "Coffee?" I looked at him. He pointed at the stain. "My wife did that to my discharge papers with tea," he said. 1,956, still mad about it. I laughed then. A real laugh, small but mine. My mother used club soda and a toothbrush. He nodded like that explained an entire marriage. They meant well. They did. Molly stood beside me, still holding her purse like it might float away if she let go. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She has Elaine's chin, which means when she decides not to break, the whole world can file a complaint and wait in line. "Dad," she said softly. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you carrying it before I knew how heavy it was. She looked at the medals. That sounds like something Grandpa would say. It probably is. I steal from the best. She almost smiled. Almost. Which, in our family, counts. Russell stayed near the side wall while people moved around him like he was a chair placed badly in a hallway. He tried speaking to the city councilman, but the man touched his own tie and drifted away. He tried approaching Marianne, but she raised one finger without looking up from her clipboard, and he stopped like a dog at an invisible fence. Eddie came over chewing mint gum loud enough to be a legal strategy. You all right? He asked me. No. Good. Honest answer. I'm upright. That's our standard now? It's a family event. Standards drop. He snorted. Your brother looks like he swallowed a door hinge. I should not have laughed. I did anyway. At 3:36 p.m., Marianne asked me to step into her office. Nathan carried the metal case behind us with both hands, his face solemn as if he were transporting a sleeping child. Marianne locked the office door, drew the blinds halfway, and placed the velvet case on her desk. Then she handed me a receipt. Temporary custody returned to Calvin Mercer, she said. Signed by me, countersigned by Nathan, with photographs taken at transfer. You do everything twice? When families are involved, 3 times. I respect that. She opened a second folder. I also printed copies of the intake form, the false authorization, our review notes, and the supplemental letter your father left in 1998. I recommend you speak with an attorney. I will. Do you want my personal opinion or my professional one? Yes. That earned me the smallest smile. Professional opinion, she said. Your brother exposed himself to serious consequences. False authorization, misrepresentation of ownership, possible unlawful entry depending on how the metals left your home. Personal opinion, he expected sentiment to make everyone sloppy. That sounds like Russell. No, she said, sliding the folder toward me. That sounds like people who do not respect quiet men. I looked at her then. There are sentences people give you that you do not know you needed until they arrive. Thank you, I said. For what? For speaking. Marianne glanced through the office window toward the exhibit hall. Russell was visible beyond the blinds, standing alone with his phone in his hand. Your father asked me to, she said. That one took me a second. She reached into the blue folder and removed the cream note again. He wrote more than the line I read. I did not touch it. She read silently for a moment, then said, He wrote that if this ever happened, I should make sure the medals did not become proof that one son loved him more than the other. My throat tightened. He said Russell always wanted to be seen. He said you always stayed to clean up after everyone left. I looked down at Dad's medals. The lamps had made them bright in the gallery. In Marianne's office, under the flat ceiling light, they looked older, smaller, more human. What else did he say? I asked. Marianne hesitated. Then she said, He said, tell Calvin keeping is not the same as hiding. I sat down because my knees had a private opinion about that sentence. For years, Russell had made me wonder if he was partly right. Maybe I had kept the medals too close. Maybe grief had turned my basement safe into a little locked chapel. Maybe Dad's story had deserved daylight sooner, and I had delayed it because sharing him felt like losing another piece. But keeping is not hiding. There it was, a difference clean enough to stand on. I signed the custody receipt at 3:52 p.m. My signature looked like my signature because I was tired and because real things are rarely neat. Outside Marianne's office, Russell was waiting. Molly and Eddie stood 10 feet behind him, not close enough to interfere, close enough to witness. That was the right distance. Russell's face had reorganized itself into injury. You got what you wanted, he said. No. You embarrassed me in front of half the county. You invited half the county. His mouth tightened. I was trying to honor Dad. I looked at him for a long moment. His blazer buttons caught the museum light. They were polished so bright they looked almost wet. No, I said. You were trying to be seen standing next to honor. He shook his head, but there was no force behind it. You always have to make me small. Russell, I have spent my whole life watching you climb onto things other people built. His eyes flashed. For a second I saw anger, then fear, then calculation searching for a place to land. I made one mistake, he said. No, you made a plan. The mistake was thinking Dad hadn't. That silenced him. Behind me, Eddie stopped chewing his gum. Russell looked at the metal case in my hands. What happens now? I change my locks. Cal, I speak to Hanrahan's son Monday morning. He has the practice now. His face went pale again. A lawyer? Yes. You'd do that to your own brother? I leaned closer. Not much. Just enough. You put a camera in my basement, copied my key, forged my name, and tried to donate Dad's medals under yours. Don't ask me to feel guilty because I'm using a calendar. Molly made a sound that might have been a laugh if the day had been kinder. Russell looked at her. You believe this? She stepped forward then. My little girl, 41 years old, mother of 2, still somehow the child who once fell asleep on my workbench stool with sawdust in her hair. I believe Grandpa, she said. 3 words. Clean. Final. Russell did not cry. He did not apologize. Not then. He looked at all of us, searching for the weakest seam. He found none. Fine, he said. Fine is a word that sounds like surrender, but often means the war is looking for a new road. He left through the side door at 4:08 p.m. I know because I looked at the clock above the museum gift shop, and because men like me notice the time when something breaks. The consequences came slowly, which is how real consequences usually travel. On Monday, I met with David Hanrahan, the son of Dad's old lawyer. He had his father's eyebrows, though not as aggressive. We filed a police report, documented the camera, the copied key, the forged authorization, and the museum paperwork. I did not push for headlines. I did not need Russell paraded. I needed protection. Russell eventually returned the copied key through his attorney in a padded envelope with no note. He agreed to pay for the locksmith, the security inspection, and the legal fees tied to recovering the medals. The museum permanently barred him from making artifact donations without verified ownership documents, which is a very specific consequence, and somehow exactly the size of him. There was talk of charges. There were meetings. There were words like diversion, restitution, civil agreement, and no contact except through counsel. I will not pretend I understood every legal turn. I am a machinist, not a courthouse squirrel. In the end, Russell avoided jail. Some people will think that means he got away with it. He did not. He lost the room. For a man like my brother, that was not small. The Rotary stopped inviting him to speak. The local paper never wrote the article he wanted, but they did publish a careful correction about the proposed donation and the verified keeper of the Harold Mercer collection. At Thanksgiving, Molly hosted without inviting him, and nobody asked why after the first minute. Families are funny that way. They will tolerate fog for years, but once the outline appears, they remember they always knew where the tree was. As for the medals, I did not put them back in the safe right away. For 90 days, they stayed at the museum under a proper loan agreement. The label said, Staff Sergeant Harold Mercer, 1,924, 2009. It listed his unit, his service dates, and one line from his oral history. Mostly I was scared and did not have time to stop being scared. No Russell, no Calvin, no family representative, just Dad. I went to see them every Friday morning at 10, after coffee and before groceries. Sometimes veterans stood there, sometimes school children. Once, a boy with a red backpack asked his teacher why a brave man would say he was scared. I waited for the answer. The teacher said, because brave people usually are. I stood behind them with Dad's Zippo in my pocket and looked at the floor for a while. When the loan ended, Marianne asked if I wanted to extend it. I almost said yes. Then I thought about Dad's word, keeping. I'll take them home, I said. For now, she nodded. For now is a respectable place. The medals went back into my basement, but not into hiding. I had a proper archival box made, acid-free, with copies of every record inside, and a typed note from Molly explaining what they were, where they had been, and what she should do if anyone ever loved the shine more than the story. I changed the safe, too. New model. Better lock. Eddie installed it and complained the whole time because friendship, at our age, is mostly skilled labor with commentary. Before he left, he tapped the safe door and said, "Lazy family won't get through this one." I said, "Ambitious family." He looked at me. "That's what lawyers are for. I don't speak to Russell now." Not really. He sent one letter 6 months later, 3 pages of apology arranged carefully around excuses. I read it once. Then, I put it in a folder marked Russell, because some things should be kept but not displayed. Some days I wonder if I did the right thing. Most days I know I did. That's enough. I did not save my father's medals because metal matters. I saved them because stories can be stolen if the wrong person gets a microphone. I saved them because quiet men are often mistaken for unlocked doors. And I saved them because my father knew both his sons clearly, which is a kind of love people do not talk about enough. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere. Last week I opened the safe, took out Dad's Zippo, and set it beside the metal case on my workbench. The lighter still has that little dent in the corner. I ran my thumb over it the way he used to. Then I looked at the medals, at the coffee stain, at the old ribbons, at the shine that had caused so much trouble. "Got him, Dad," I said to the quiet room. And after a minute, because the house had earned it, I lit the Zippo just once, watched the small flame stand steady, and closed the lid.